Hello, good day, and welcome to this session on the relationship between trade rules and other procurement objectives. By the end of this session, you should be able to identify the multilateral instruments governing international trade rules, and then understand World Bank guidelines for procuring loans, understand government procurement agreement on contractual relations, understand European Union procurement directives, understand the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and finally understand ancestral model law. So, to begin with, multilateral instruments which govern international trade rules. It should be noted that there are several instruments that governments could rely on as guidance with respect to the conduct of public procurement, especially international procurement. And the instruments have contributed to the development of internationally accepted principles of public procurement. And they show that public procurement is an effective tool and a strategic part of public sector policy and systems, and hence an administrative function that can contribute to a higher objective. And some of these instruments are classified or described subsequently. To begin with, the first instrument is the World Bank Procurement and Consultant Guidelines. The second is the Government Procurement Agreement, then the EU Procurement Directives, and the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, as well as the Ancestral Model Law on Public Procurement. These are discussed subsequently into detail. So if you take the World Bank guideline, basically the World Bank is an international organization that was created by sovereign member states through articles of agreement, and these entered into force in December 1945. So these articles of agreement require that the bank make arrangements to ensure that the proceeds of any loan are used only for the purposes for which the loan was granted, with due attention to considerations of economy and efficiency, that is value for money, and without regard to political or non-economic influence or considerations, and provide that the borrower may withdraw the loan proceeds only to meet the expenditures made in connection with the operation as they are actually incurred. So the World Bank makes monies available to member states or countries for those monies to be used for developmental projects in the public sector to provide utilities for society. And it should be noted that the borrower, which in essence is usually the government who takes it on behalf of countries, utilizes the loans that they procure for the purposes that are stipulated in the loan request agreement. So the World Bank does not attach political face or image to loan procurement and does not consider or does not have affiliations to a given political party or political group, but they give loans to countries in their country capacity and not to people or presidents in their political capacity. So the World Bank guidelines ensure that the monies that are procured are used specifically for project execution and procurement of contracts. So these guidelines apply to all contracts for goods, works and services that are financed in whole or in part from bank loans and are made applicable through the loan agreement. So the general conditions applicable to each loan agreement provide that the loan agreement takes precedence over national law and is insulated from the effect of changes in national law. So whatever changes for instance, if you take Ghana, whatever laws govern our procurement systems or whatever laws govern our financial management systems does not affect World Bank loans guidelines. So if you are charging a given interest rate, you are not supposed to use, or it's not supposed to or is not likely to influence the World Bank loan that has been granted to the organization to the country. So countries are supposed to ensure that the World Bank loan agreement takes precedence over any national law that is prevailing in a given country. Then the second instrument is the Government Procurement Agreement, and it is a multilateral agreement of the World Trade Organization which regulates government procurement markets of the World Trade Organization members that have chosen to become part of this agreement. And the purpose of the Government Procurement Agreement is to facilitate market access by suppliers from Government Procurement Agreement member countries to contract opportunities in the covered public sector entities in other GPA member countries. So the GPA sets out high-level standards rather than detailed procurement rules and regulations. And it should be noted that it reflects a lowest common denominator approach, or the minimum requirements to which the parties should adhere and must give effect through legislative changes in their public procurement laws. The next instrument is the European Union Procurement Directives. So it should be noted that the EU has adopted several directives with respect to public procurement, and the Public Sector Directive, as well as the Utilities Directive, is there to coordinate the procedures for the award of procurement contracts in EU member states above the set financial threshold. Then the Remedies Directive helps to deal with complaints or review systems. Then you move on to the next instrument, that is the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. It should be noted that the essence of this is basically to reduce or avoid corruption. So it has established four themes around which procurement needs to be done, or four themes around which it frowns against corruption. That is, it seeks to govern prevention, it seeks to criminalize corruption, it seeks to recover assets that are on underutilized in corrupt activities, and it seeks to foster international cooperation against corruption. And finally, to the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, also known as the Ancestral Model Law. It was established by the United Nations General Assembly in 1966 with the mandate to further the progressive harmonization and unification of the law of international trade, in recognition that the disparities in national laws governing international trade created obstacles to the flow of trade. So let's say China and Ghana are trading. Or let's say Ghana and Saudi Arabia are trading, and their laws are different from ours because Saudi Arabia is dominantly a Muslim country or Arabian country or Arab country, and Ghana is dominantly a Christian country. So the laws applicable in that era is different from what are applicable in our jurisdiction. So in order to avoid some of these confusions as to whose legal regime should prevail in a given public procurement activity, the ancestral law has come to provide standards to guide how international trade should be done among EU member states. So it should be noted that the model law is not mandatory to use, but it is intended to serve as a model for states for the purposes of evaluating and modernizing procurement laws and practices, as well as the establishment of procurement legislation where there is no legislation or there is no procurement law in a given country, thereby supporting harmonization of procurement regulation internationally and promoting international trade. So in this session, you have learned about some multilateral instruments and how they are applicable and different in each state.